I suppose that's my sign that the recording is process to begin. The title of my presentation today is TOEIC Test Scores and Extensive Reading. My name is Professor Patrick Dougherty. I will introduce a little bit about myself as we go forward. I had this screen here just in case I needed to get into the Zoom room, but here I am. So, all right, so who am I? I'm the Dean of Faculty of International Liberal Arts. I'm a professor of International Liberal Arts. I specialize actually in history and literature, although I have an extensive background in ESL and EFL. I work at Akita International University up here in Akita, Japan, up in the north of the main island of Honshu. I've been an educator, now well over 35 years. I've been active. I started my career in the United States, which is my home country. I've lived in Japan on and off for almost 2 decades now. I've worked in Bangladesh. I go there pretty much every year, actually, for a variety of research and presentation and workshop purposes. And I lived and worked in the United Arab Emirates for about 5 years. I lived in Abu Dhabi, actually, when I was there. And I've worked as a secondary teacher in the United States and also in Japan. I've worked with undergraduate students extensively, and I've also taught and run graduate programs. So that's a little bit about me. Akita International University is kind of an interesting place. It's small, like most Japanese universities are. It's a public university, and it's an EMI university, which means we use English as a medium of instruction here at our college. And as you can see, we have a very diverse student population. We have international students. About 25% of our student population actually are international students who come to join us. So it's a very cosmopolitan place, even though we're off kind of in a rural region of the Tohoku area up in north of Honshu. It's actually a very pretty area, as you will see when I show you. So where is it on a map? There it is, Akita up in the north, as I said. So we have snowy winters, sometimes very snowy. This last winter was not. And I like this map that we have there. Well, this little design, because it shows a map of the world made out of cherry blossoms. And we're actually just now finishing the cherry blossom season up here in this part of Japan. It's been actually quite pretty. And this region is a kind of a, well, you're out in the countryside basically is where we are, but it's very beautiful. It has lots of history, lots of things to do outdoors. Most of our young scholars who come here really enjoy it. You do need to enjoy winter. I will warn you about that. We have lots of history, as I said, lots of onsens, which are the traditional Japanese baths. Both, a lot of them are outdoors. These are natural hot springs we're talking about. So it's a pretty place. Now, let me share with you my abstract. We're talking about the impact of extensive reading on university students' TOEIC test scores. I mean, we recognize the fact that an institution has to usually invest some money in extensive reading materials for students. So we often need to justify our rationale for why are we encouraging the purchase of materials or getting into databases or ebooks, etc. And so looking at this and using multiple regression analysis, this grant-supported 1-year-long study examined the connections between extensive reading and the improvement of university science and technology students' TOEIC test scores at a public university in Japan. I just want to also mention the grant. It's a grant and aid for scientific research, courtesy of the Ministry of Education of Japan. And also I do have, although they're not joining me here, I'm the one giving this presentation. There were 2 other colleagues involved in the actual research process, and they should be mentioned. So Professor Takahashi and Professor Tacker. Now, this research was not done at Akita International University. I want to make sure you understand that because, as I mentioned, Akita International University is an EMI. It's an English Medium of Instruction institution. Now, that makes it not a normal environment for language learners in Japan, university students in Japan. So we found another university nearby in the prefecture, which is the Science and Technological University, four-year university, that we felt was more representative of a typical English language learning environment for Japanese students. So it mirrored more closely what a typical Japanese student going to college would experience in their studies of English. And they would also go at it with the same general attitude probably that most students would approach English language education. It's not their major. It might be something of interest to them. They might have interest and see it as important and want to learn English and maybe even want to become familiar with it. But if we use Akita International University, where the students are incredibly motivated to learn English, where they study everything in English, all of their subjects, it just would not be the same thing. So we were lucky that we found another institution that was willing to allow us to do the research. Now, we had three research questions that were directing us. Number one, how many English words must students read to reach the CEFR B1 level? Number two, what factors affected students' TOEIC scores? And three, what motivational factors impacted the amount of reading that students were doing? So those are our three research questions. I think there's somebody who is not muted in the. If you could mute yourself, I'm hearing sounds. There'll be time for questions also at the end if there are questions. Number one, how many English words must students read to reach the CEFR B1 level? Okay, now just so you know, I think everyone here possibly does, but again, it might help. Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, CEFR B1 is intermediate. Now that means that students can communicate effectively, basically normal day-to-day situations. This is kind of what I always tell people. Maybe my Japanese is kind of getting there slowly, but where they're communicatively competent. They can go to the store, they can go to the post office, they can go to the bank, they can take care of the basic day-to-day business of being alive, maybe in an English language environment. And then we use something called mReader to record the number of words read. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about what that is, but if you want to find out about mReader, please simply Google it. It's out there, but it's something that we utilize to record the number of words, actual words that students were reading. And students took the TOEIC test at the beginning and end of the one academic year study. Okay. Now, what factors affected students' TOEIC scores? Was initial language ability or volume of reading more impactful? This was measured with pre and post academic year TOEIC test scores. What motivational factors impacted the amount of reading that students were doing? How did we measure that? We used multiple regression analysis to determine these points. I don't know if we have any statistics nerds here. Fortunately, well, I can hold my own with statistics, but if you want real specific information about the multiple regression analysis or data and that, I'll invite you to contact me. I don't have a problem sharing our charts and everything that we have, but I felt with the 20 minutes, 25 minutes I had, I didn't want to burden people with a lot of charts and graphs. I just want to kind of get to the meat of our findings. Now, the rationale for our study, as I've kind of indicated, previous studies investigated the relationship between ER, extensive reading, and TOEIC test scores. Here's just a few of them. And most of them indicated that ER promotes the improvement of TOEIC test scores, that an extensive reading does help. So, in a questionnaire we gave at the end of the school year, a significant number of students answered that extensive reading was the most difficult English study activity for them. They said it was hard. And some clearly indicated they didn't really enjoy it, but even if they know that ER is an effective approach, they keep struggling. So is ER counterproductive because of its difficulty? Is it too difficult to be worthwhile is a question. In other words, You know, are they having such trouble that maybe it's a tool that we shouldn't force upon them? The answer we found was no. Our research design was simple. Results were developed using the word counts, TOEIC online test scores, TOEIC bridge test scores, and answers to the questionnaire that we gave them. And as I said, this was a 1 year academic year, or I should say 1 academic year study that included students who volunteered, again, volunteered in a freshman English class over their first year at university. The participants in this study, it was a small study. I'll explain why it was a small study, numbered 17 male and female first-year students, and it was, of course, at a 4-year science and technology university in rural Japan. If you grow up and live in Tokyo, for example, a lot of times Japanese students have more exposure to English and things, but out in the rural area, the prefectures in the rural areas of Japan, there are not that many opportunities to interact with people who you might need to use English with. That's just something, an observation. The students were between the ages of 18 and 19, so they were teenagers, they were young, and their native language in all cases was Japanese. Okay. Now, what do they have access to? They had access to 8,000 regular graded readers. I think everyone knows what a graded reader is. In addition to about 550 ebook graded readers, the students were instructed to start with the easiest book. So we said, try 2 or 3 levels lower than your current level, so that you weren't discouraged by high-level words or complicated grammar structures, and then progress through. So we want them to kind of start simple. And continuing the research design, TOEIC bridge tests were also given twice a year at the beginning and toward the end of the academic year. These are a simpler version of the TOEIC. The TOEIC bridge tests, it's a bit of a low-level version of the full-scale TOEIC listening and reading test. They also took the full-scale tests, but we wanted data, but we didn't want to overburden them since they were volunteers. All the data included the TOEIC online test scores, the TOEIC bridge test scores, the number of words recorded in MReader, and the data from the questionnaire were analyzed by using this statistical tool, SPSS version 28.0. And these are the questions. I'm not going to read these to you, but they had a variety of effective quantitative and cognitive questions that were asked to try to get background on the students as they were beginning the process of getting into our study and their reading. Now, there were challenges that limited the scope of the study. And to be honest, the COVID-19 pandemic, we applied for the grant from the government. We got the grant just as the pandemic was starting. And we had the idea that the students, according to our research plan, would have access to the physical graded reader books and a lot of other things on campus. But of course, campuses were closed, semester by semester. Fortunately, the government kind of was willing to extend the period that we would be allowed to use the grant monies, because that was a concern we had. So what was going to be a simple kind of, okay, 1 academic year, it took us more than a year and a half before we could actually get into the actual research, solely due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the issues surrounding that. So the actual study was still 1 year, but it was basically a long process of communication and trying to hope that we'd be able to go back to a physical campus. And finally, we did, of course, go back to the physical campus. And then also we were a little concerned about the instruction online, if that had any impact, but we decided that for our purposes in our study, it wouldn't. There was also a researcher who was hospitalized and had health issues, so it took us a little bit of time also to wait until that individual was back and ready to go. But I will say this, the Ministry of Education at every stage was quite understanding as far as our situation. But anyone who does research knows things happen. Okay, so number one, how many English words must students read to reach the CEFR B1 level, an intermediate level that we're looking for? And Well, you can read all of that. I'm not going to go into it, but basically, we came up with it was 483,660 words. That's what they needed to read to get up to that level from where they were. Approximately about a 500,000 words. That's what we figured. And what factors, now that sounds, overwhelming for students if you just throw that at them, but I think it's important for us to know as faculty. I don't think I would tell them, oh, you need to read a 500,000 words. Sounds frightening. But we need to know that, so books, numbers of words per volume, all of that important for us to at least understand. And factors affected students' TOEIC scores. A multiple regression analysis of the data showed that the amount of reading affected their test scores more than their initial ability. We wanted to know if, okay, what's your initial ability at the language? And so we tested that. And then we were looking, okay, what was the thing that impacted the most? The amount of reading was important. More important was the amount of reading they did than their initial ability as far as moving up to the B1 level. And what motivational factors impacted the amount of reading that students were doing? So these are things that would be, that would motivate them as individuals to continue reading. Again, these are not English majors. There was no English major program at the Science and Tech University, but English was required. And some of the students who had aspirations to work internationally or maybe to go into academia understood, okay, I need to learn English. And there was some motivated kids. And these were students who volunteered for the study. So what motivational factors did we find? Well, we analyzed the data. The students' cognitive awareness and positive attitude towards reading were influencing the total amount of reading being done. So if they enjoyed reading, or at least they understood, hey, this is important, I need to read books in English. I need to select graded readers that I find entertaining and maybe also a little challenging, more challenging as I go forward. These things assisted them as they went into this study. And as I said, they were basically on their own to go and to read books. They had to do a little quiz on the graded on the M reader in order to be able to find out how many words they were actually reading. And we found that if they read that magic 500,000 words, they moved up into the B1 level from where they were. I'm concluding here a little early, but I guess that's okay. One thing we hope out of this, and we recognize it's a small scale study. It was actually smaller than we originally wanted, but we were having trouble getting volunteers. A lot of kids, they'd come back on campus. Things were still pretty, up in the air, and the kids were being taken out of class because of COVID-19, and still we had faculty getting sick and a lot of things happening, people all masked up still the semester we started this, but they were physically able to go to the library, they were physically able to take the books out, they were able to read the books that they had the access to all of the graded readers that we had provided to them. And so it was a small study, but you have to start somewhere. And what we are trying to do is justify, again, we felt as a faculty that reading, a sense of reading was important, that we felt that it would help students, but again, um, graded readers are expensive. Buying them requires outlay of funding. We have to convince those who are in charge of the funding each year to continue to provide monies for these resources for our students. And we also need to share with our students themselves the information that, listen, we've looked at this and we know maybe for some of you this is very challenging, but if you want to master English, if you want to improve your English, let's say, just improve it, then you need, one of the best ways to do this would be through reading. You learn new vocabulary, new terminology, new phrases, a lot of different things. So anyway, that's what we came away with from all of this. And we know extensive reading, though challenging and requiring some access to resources, naturally, was shown to be an effective way to increase students' English language acuity. And I can actually mention that at Akita International University, where I work, it's an EMI, English Medium of Instruction University. We really push reading with our students. And I mean, we have to, in their foundation program, they basically have one semester in an English foundation program. The kids who come here already have a very high level of English, but often it might not be academic English. So we have to work with them to increase their academic vocabulary and work intensely with them. But we also are lucky that we've been able to develop, build, and have access to a huge assortment of graded readers and other books and materials for our students. And what we've discovered too is students who are studying English or improving their English, even though we're an EMI program, often will like to study other languages as well. Like we have language programs in Chinese and French and Spanish, in Russian, in Korean, for example. And so we have, courses they can take for these other languages, but we also have materials in those languages. And what we found out is the students seem to be, and this isn't part of the study, I'm just sharing this anecdotally, the students have had an experience with extensive reading in English, and they decide themselves to apply that extensive reading methodology to the other languages they're studying. So we have books in Chinese, we have magazines in Chinese and things like that, for example, or in Russian or in French or in Spanish. And the kids are actively checking these books out because they seem to understand that, hey, extensive reading helped me with English. Extensive reading is going to help me master Russian. So we've had very good luck with it. Again, it's one of those things where you always have to justify big ticket items, and we have a whole center dedicated to these materials and of course staff to help us with that center, and we have a faculty members in charge of it. So we have to put a lot of money into this. So naturally we have to convince the powers that be that this is a good and appropriate resource and well worth the funding that we're asking for each and every year. Okay. And my references are there. And now I don't know if there are going to be any questions. I know it's it's late here. It's already it's going on 8 o'clock at night here in Japan. But if there are any questions, I'll entertain them now. You can chat them to me, or you can just unmute and ask the question, and we'll see what happens. Otherwise, I'm going to share with you via chat my university work email. So if you do ever have any questions about the study, or if you want access to the data that we've been collecting, and we are publishing this as well, then I'm more than happy to share it with you. I hope that, I've taught reading as well as composition as far as ESL and EFL. And I really, because also I teach literature, I really push reading with students. I mean, in my literature classes, because of course this is EMI, the kids are very high level. So we read Gilgamesh, we read the Odyssey in English. I have another course, we read Lord of the Flies, we read 1984. Then we have other courses that deal with more current literature, and we have a poetry class. So these, but reading's important. And I tell the kids that if you really want to improve, and for our students at Akita International University, they want to be bilingual or multilingual at least, but bilingual at least in Japanese and English. And by the time they finish our program, they tend to be. I mean, they're functionally bilingual. And the way one of the key components is to read, to read, to read, to read. And so we do push it. Okay. Anyway, I think it's my time's up. I'll allow the next presenter to kind of get set up. But thank you, everybody, for your attention. I do appreciate it. I wish I could go to Dubai. I try to go to Arabia Tessel physically when I can, but for a variety of reasons this year, some economic, because the yen is not doing well, I was not able to make the trip. But maybe next year. Maybe next year I can. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone.
you.